Hi, I'm Mr. Wahlberg. Welcome to the Introduction to Rhetoric. Today we're going to talk about context, barriers, and advantages. We're going to get a little notes today. I'm going to send you off for the rhetoric that we're going to analyze. So the first thing that I want to talk about is when you do contextual research, you got to figure out what are the goals of the rhetor. I mentioned this in a previous class, where the goals of the rhetor are really paramount. That's how you can determine whether or not it's a successful piece of rhetoric or not. What were the goals of the rhetor? But you also need to understand the cultural context of the rhetoric, like in what environment is it being portrayed. And I think maybe the example that I can give is the back to school video that Dr. Rapp puts out each year. He's kind of hams it up, at least for the last few of them, and they're kind of dorky, and he wants to create a positive situation surrounding the rules that he's going on to. And it's the cultural context of starting school, trying to set expectations, but to do it in a way that is friendly, right? That's a cultural context. And it wouldn't work in other schools. Other people that say don't know Dr. Rapp, they would watch his videos and they think, boy, those are super weird, and your principal seems like a dork. And really, he has a doctorate, and they won't get it. But in the context of our school, where we know Dr. Rapp and we're cool with his dorkiness, or at least we accept it, it's successful here. And it, again, may not work in other contexts, but for the most part, it's well received at St. James Academy. You also have to understand the mindset of the audience. In this case, it's produced in the beginning of the year, so you have students who are readjusting. They're going with what the rules are. We've been in summertime, or in the situation that I'm recording this, it's kind of post-COVID, and so we're reestablishing a lot of the stuff that has kind of slipped in the last couple of years. But the mindset of the audience, usually, that it's I think people understand that at the beginning of a school year, you need to establish the norms and go over what the rules are along the way. The same video may not be well received if it's dropped in November when we've been back to school for a while. Then it would feel like, it's out of place. The rules are already going. The machine's in motion. So the mindset of the actual audience is important there. I want to talk for a moment about rhetorical barriers and advantages. And this is a crucial piece of the way that we understand how a rhetor is going to perform. Every rhetor goes into their piece understanding that they have certain barriers and certain advantages to present their rhetoric, to make the case for persuasion. And the audience might lay out some beliefs or attitudes or values or what they're willing to pay attention to. And the way that I like to explain it is that when Bill Self walks onto the court during late night, at the beginning of the basketball season, and it's officially late night is the first practice. It's not all that practicey. It's more of an event than a show. But the crowd at Allen Fieldhouse that goes to late night is super receptive, and they want to be there. And, Bill Self could kind of almost do anything. He has a huge advantage when he takes the court or he gets a microphone. The audience there is there to see him, and they are on his side. The attitudes and the values certainly reflect a strong advantage for head coach of the Kansas Jayhawks, Bill Self. If he were to do the same thing and walk into, I don't even know what the thing is called at Missouri where they play at the barn, I don't know, whatever University of Missouri plays in, if Bill Self were to walk in there, he's not going to get the same kind of reception, even though, Mizzou basketball has slipped into irrelevance in the last few years. It still wouldn't be cool to put a coach of a nearby school, even if it's not really a rival school anymore. It wouldn't be well received. If Bill Self were to go to Manhattan and go into K-State and he goes into the octagon of mild irritation, he's still not going to be received there as well. There would be a real barrier. It would actually be a problem for Bill Self to go introduce the same rhetoric in the arena of somebody that wasn't, his team. That would be a real barrier. The attitudes and the values would go against him. I think about this when I sit down to give my Modern Day Witness or my God Week talk. There are certain advantages that I have in that most of the time I know the students and they get to know me. And by that point, we have a relationship where we know what to expand of each other, like we're familiar with. But if I were to drop the same kind of witnesses during Modern Day or God Week, in August, when we're still kind of getting to know each other, it wouldn't go as well. We don't have the same kind of familiarity. And even though students may be respectful and hear me out, it's just, we don't have the same kind of rapport that's set up. Or beliefs. If I want to give my witness story in a Catholic school, it's going to be received differently than if I were to give my witness story in a secular school that just doesn't have the same culture of Christian witness to it. So there's certain barriers and certain advantages that every rhetor has. And sometimes they're obvious, and honestly, sometimes they're not so obvious. You got to find out a little bit more of the audience. Who is the audience that's there? Who has come to the performance? Who's come to the show, to the speech? It may not be the crowd that the rhetor assumed. Maybe the rhetor was assuming that there would be a certain number of supporters there, and it turns out there are opponents at the place, so the speech wouldn't be well received in that case. There are also situational barriers and advantages, and I've given little hints of this too. That's not necessarily related to the audience, but it could be of the situation, like cultural factors. An audience with a different cultural mindset or a different set of cultural experiences will receive rhetoric differently than others. I have a friend that's in the advertising business, and she often talks about what it's like to craft ad campaigns towards African Americans, and how for many years African American marketing was just white marketing, but they switched the actors for black people, and it was like it took a major mind shift to say that the African American community is not just like white people with dark skin. They have a different set of experiences and a different background and a just different way of interacting with the world, and to market in a way that is meaningful to an African American community is different than it's a way to marketing for a white community. The cultural factors get in there. It's also worth noting the complexity of the issue matters a lot. The situational barrier of explaining something very complicated with a lot of moving parts is going to set up either a barrier or an advantage to it. So if a person is trying to make a case for environmental treatment in a particular area, maybe say like to clean a pond or something like that, it could be pretty straightforward, and the pollution is easy to remediate and easy to understand, and so it's easy to get the public on board. But if you get something that is harder, it's not clear what the source of the pollution is, or not clear how fast it would happen to get it cleaned out, or what you do with the material once it's been removed from the water source, something like that. The complexity of the issue could create a real barrier to the rhetoric. Or I suppose there's even a way that it could go around, that maybe sometimes rhetors don't give enough complexity. They try to oversimplify complicated issues, and the audience wants the details for it. So that could be a situational barrier advantage. Or specific events just before or during the presentation. These are also situational. If there's a heckler in the crowd, that's very tough for any speaker to have somebody that's heckling them. That would certainly be a specific event during the presentation, or some significant news that happens just before it. Like if somebody was talking about school safety right after some kind of school tragedy, that would certainly shape the conversation. That could be a real advantage to a rhetor, to saying like, hey, these wounds are fresh and we need to talk about it now. Or it could be a serious barrier that the wounds are too fresh and people aren't ready to have that discussion. So those are situational barriers. There's also barriers that are occasional barriers, where there are standards of appropriateness or categorical expectations, that there are certain things that an audience just expects the rhetor to do. And the example that I like to give is to say a comedy show. You take like a Kevin Hart show. We expect that a Kevin Hart show should be funny and punchy and moves at a pretty good clip, and he has a good understanding of the audience and how to really sell a joke. And it's fun. Like a Kevin Hart show would be fun to pay attention to. Likewise, and so we would have that kind of occasion set up as a rhetorical advantage to Kevin Hart at a show. If suddenly Kevin Hart wanted to get real serious, that's actually not a categorical expectation. That's not what people are there to hear. If he wants to go drop some serious issue on people, it would be out of place for the nature of a comedy show. And I take that as like contrast it to a homily. I think of my own Archbishop, right? Archbishop Naumann, a person who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. But when he gets up to give a homily, he has a certain expectation of appropriateness. He's a successor to the apostles. He speaks as a man of the church, and he has a certain level that he needs to perform at, and an expectation of what we're going to get out of a sermon from a clergyman. Archbishop Naumann doesn't tell jokes very well. That's not his style. He's a very sincere person. He's not publicly funny. I think he actually is pretty funny when I've talked to him individually, but that's not the role that he takes in homiletics. That's not his real goal most of the time. And it wouldn't be categorical expectations. You don't expect him to get up there and be a whizzer with jokes on that. The standards of appropriateness are different as a sermon in a religious ceremony than it is at a string of jokes at a comedy show. And then one of the last piece that I want to talk about as a barrier or an advantage would be the reputation of the rhetor. The person that's getting up there will carry a certain amount of expectation with them as they go. And I think maybe the great example of this was the presidential election between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, that each one of them comes to a debate with a certain amount of expectations, that Trump is punchy and a fast thinker and is known for laying out zingers that takes his opponent out of his comfort level. Joe Biden was known as being kind of a policy guy that would know the details of the job, and he would kind of go see it carried out. He has a strong legislative history of seeing policies carried out, but he's not a man of zingers. And when he goes off script, it typically hasn't gone very well. So you see Joe Biden here in his old age as being a very guarded person, I think, because he knows the traps out of it. The reputation of the rhetor comes up as a real advantage or a barrier. When Donald Trump comes to a debate, he would have this expectation that he was going to really take a person off their game. That makes the opponent carry that reputation as well, that he knows he's going to be under a certain amount of attack. When Joe Biden would come to a debate, he would have the reputation as being not really like an exciting guy in debates. He was kind of a plodder, more of it. Now Biden did have other personas in other ways, but in terms of debate, he just wasn't like that. He would carry a different kind of reputation, which could be an advantage or it could be a barrier depending on what the goal of the rhetor was. If Biden was trying to show himself as as a real adept zinger of one-liners, he has a barrier to overcome that he's just not really known for that style of debate. If Donald Trump wanted to come across as a man of policy details, where he knows all the fine points of the issue, that's not the reputation he carries. So he would have a hard time convincing the audience to do that. But I'm not sure that either one of the guys going into a debate would, take that as their strategy or their goal. So understanding barriers and advantages is, and the context in which it's presented, is going to be the subject of our next piece of rhetoric. The piece of rhetoric you're going to see is one of Booker T. Washington at the Atlanta Exposition Address. Now, when we get into this, you're going to have to spend a little bit of time understanding what was the Atlanta Exposition Address. Who went to this? This was an event in 1895. Why was Booker T. Washington there? It might also be important for you to understand who was Booker T. Washington. He was a civil rights reformer. That term, as we know it, wasn't widely in use at the time, but he was a civil rights reformer advocating for rights of African Americans. But he had a specific position that he would take, which was popular with some and very unpopular with others. Even in the black community, as a way of his way he would approach civil rights was not the same for everybody. And so it might be worth noting a little bit of who Booker T. Washington is. What is the Atlanta Exposition Address? Why is he there? And why is he addressing the crowd? This will go a number of pages. So pages 29 through 33 is the text of the speech. We don't have an original recording. 1895 is a little early for the recording equipment. So instead, you have a voice actor who is reading this one. I don't know this particular voice actor, but delivers it very fairly, I think, to the way that Booker T. Washington had written it. Then you're going to, on page 35, answer the questions: what's the goal of the piece? What is the implied relationship of the rhetor to the audience? What role is the rhetor playing? What is the tone of the rhetoric? And based on your understanding of the rhetoric of the audience, so you're going to need to figure out who is the audience of and the rhetoric presented, what do you think? Do you think it was successful or failure? You're going to answer all of this. I'd like you to get it done in class, although I don't want you to give it to the sub to collect it. Have it done before you go, but staple it together, and I'm going to pick it up when we are in class together next. That's all we got. Thank you. God bless you.